Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today we're reviewing the new album from The Sword, Used Future. When it comes to The Sword, I've enjoyed the majority of the albums that they've put out. Their last album that they released prior to this one, High Country, was not one that I was particularly, that was really a favorite of mine. It's probably my least favorite album from this group. Not that it was an awful record or anything like that. I just felt like there was a lot of filler on it. I didn't really care for the more hard rock direction that the group decided to go in on that record. And this record here, to an extent, fixes some of the problems I had with the last album, but at the same time brings some of its own unique problems along with it. And overall, it doesn't really manage to surpass its predecessor all that much, in my opinion. One problem I really had with the last album from this group was that it just felt a bit too long, a bit too stretched out. It had a bit too many tracks in it, really. And on the surface, this album seems like it's going to fix a lot of those problems, given that it has a shorter runtime, it has less tracks on it, and well, it definitely doesn't feel like quite as long an experience as their last album. This album still has a fair bit of, filler, I guess you could say, on it. Tracks I really just don't care for all too much, just throughout it, really. A lot of this album, one of the biggest flaws I think that it has really going for it is just how much instrumental content is on it. It seems like almost half the songs on this album have no lyrics or vocals at all in them. And I don't think necessarily that you need vocals all the time or lyrics to have a great song or anything like that. There's plenty of great instrumental songs out there. In fact, The Sword have made some of them in the past. I just don't really feel like any of the ones on this album really stand out all too much. They just kind of feel like filler a lot of the times and just don't really add all too much to the overall album. And that's a shame, considering that it seems to make up almost half the album. The amount of instrumental tracks or intermissions or just long instrumental sections on other songs that maybe do have vocals, it just doesn't really add up to be anything all that interesting, in my opinion. Though I will say that I enjoyed the closing track on this thing, Brown Mountain, or at least the closing track prior to like the kind of outro type track thing. That is an instrumental on here that I do really think is pretty solid overall. It's not anything outstanding, but it's a pretty solid track, probably one of my favorites in the track listing, and it is an instrumental, proving how you can have a good instrumental track, but much of this album isn't really filled with really memorable instrumental tracks. And a problem with this album that really carries over from the last one that they had was just the lack of memorable guitar riffs and guitar parts, really. Not necessarily heavy ones, because even on albums like Warp Riders, which is probably my favorite Sword album, that had plenty of memorable guitar parts, they were already starting to lean more into a hard rock direction, I feel, on that record at times. But still, there were memorable guitar parts. The last album from this group really lacked a lot of memorable guitar parts. It was just kind of more laid back, which can work at times, but it just didn't really work on that last project, and it doesn't really work here either. Just many times the guitar parts on here kind of have sort of a more laid back, just spacey sound to them, which it does to an extent work with The Sword overall, just their overall sound, I guess, if maybe they were to use it with some of those heavier riffs at times, some of those more memorable riffs. But I just feel like this album really lacks memorable guitar parts that really stand out. And that's a shame, considering I feel like the guitar parts are easily one of the most memorable and best parts of this band overall. The guitars, like much of these tracks, just kind of meander on and just really don't amount to much, I feel. Like, listening to this thing, it just really just feels like background noise when I'm listening to it. Nothing really pops out at me as being, a memorable guitar riff or an interesting drum part or anything like that, a catchy hook or anything like that. It's all just kind of there, honestly. And as for the vocals and stuff, the other instruments, really, aside from the guitars, they're all fine as well. Like, there's no parts that are really awful or just offensively bad, but they don't really stand out either. And it just makes the whole project feel kind of meh overall, I guess you could say. For the most part, the lyrics on this album aren't anything too memorable either. I do like some of the lyrics on the track Used Future, just the concept of the track, how it's just kind of talking about how the future might not always be as nice as how people dream it will be, or how they may make it seem super futuristic or things like that, but really it's not all going to be all that great. I do like that concept, but I just really don't care for much of the rest of the track, really. I think the song has an interesting idea behind it, but the execution of it isn't all that interesting, honestly. And just having an interesting song concept on itself isn't enough to really hook me in for repeated listens. Overall, I'd say this album is pretty average. Nothing really pops out at me when I'm listening to it. Much of it just kind of is like background noise for the most part, just kind of there, just very spacey, just very, kind of taking its time, going all over the place. It doesn't really just do much for me when I'm listening to it. And like I said, there's nothing on here that's, offensively bad or just makes me want to turn the album off. But listening to this thing, I just, makes me want to listen to better albums from this group that do have more memorable guitar parts or hooks to them or just anything really memorable. Because I feel like this album really lacks those all the way through. So really, I just recommend this album mostly to hardcore fans of this group, and chances are if you are a hardcore fan of this group, you've probably already checked out this album anyways. But, aside from that, I feel like this group has better albums out there that you should probably check out beforehand. The first 4 albums from this group, I would say, are much better, and the last album from this group, like I said, falls to many of the same, problems that this album does. Though this album does fix some things, yet at the same time brings in some of its own problems. So overall, I don't think it's much of an improvement over the last project. Though maybe I do like it a bit more, just given that it is shorter. It doesn't feel quite as stretched out. It doesn't feel like it has as much filler. But yeah, this project still overall is just very meh, at least to me. But that's just my own opinion. If you like this album, it's perfectly fine. And in fact, leave down in the comment section down below whether or not you like this project or not, or share some of your favorite tracks, things of that sort. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, I'd greatly appreciate if you leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future album reviews and other music-related content. Make sure to follow me on all my social medias, linked in the description down below. Thanks for watching, guys, and stay golden.